So our first speaker is Dr. Randy Eberts. He is the president of the WE Upjohn Institute for Employment Research, which is an independent nonprofit research organization that conducts and supports research on policy-relevant employment and regional economic issues. Before joining the Institute in September of 1993, Dr. Eberts was Assistant Vice President and Economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. During 1991 to 92, Dr. Eberts served as Senior Staff Economist on the President's Council of Economic Advisors. He was also the Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Oregon and a Visiting Assistant Professor at Texas A&M University. Dr. Eberts received his PhD in Economics from Northwestern University, and he has published numerous academic articles and has co-authored several books. And with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Eberts.
Yeah, right, yeah. So I don't know if you want to go through that introduction of me again, because I can't remember some of those dates. They seem so long ago, but anyway, certainly it's a pleasure to be here. My role is to talk about the study that the Upjohn Institute did for NIST and on the MEPs. And just to mention a little bit about the Institute itself, you heard a little bit about it, but we were started in 1932, and so we were there during the Great Depression as an experiment to try to find ways to help displaced workers. And so since then, we've been doing work on the workforce side as well as the economic development side, and this is where we come in with the knowledge and the ability to look at all the intricate effects, all the effects that happen throughout the economy when you have something as important as MEP helping manufacturers around the country. And so that's what I want to talk about today. If anybody has looked at our study, I want to just focus on some sort of middle ground results, and that's what I'll be doing here in this particular presentation. So the study was based on the independent surveys that have been collected from all of the MEP members, all of the MEP partners, I should say. There's about 6,500 of these, so there's a number of them to add to this particular study. And these surveys ask the client to talk about or to indicate whether or not the MEP activities have had a positive effect on various outcomes. And these outcomes include the jobs created and retained, the sales created and retained, as well as the cost savings that might take place because of working with MEP. And also investments in plant and equipment, as well as in job training. And so if the client responded yes to the survey, then the survey asked them to give a quantitative estimate of how many jobs might be created and retained because of these. So what we have from that is a very good indication of the number of jobs, the amount of sales, and the amount of investment that MEP has influenced through these partnerships. For example, about 43% of the 6,500 respondents reported that MEP had a positive impact on creating and retaining jobs for their businesses. 45% indicated a positive combined sales effect, and 50% reported that MEP had a positive effect on investment and job training. So you can see how important MEP has become for many of these clients that they have. So what we did was to add up all these responses from all the surveys that have been taking place, and this is for, again, the most current year, which is basically 2016. And so the estimate comes up with about 86,000 jobs across the country created or retained, with businesses reporting about 20,000 jobs actually created due to the MEP activities. Direct sales from MEP activities amounted to about $9 billion across the country. And so what the Upjohn Institute did was to use an econometric model, a sophisticated model called the REMI model. And this is something we've used for many, many years and worked closely with Fred and his father, George Trez, who've developed this model, to look at how these direct effects, these direct jobs created and retained, how they permeate throughout the economy through indirect effects. That is, when you hire somebody, that means you're producing something that needs to, you need to purchase goods and services to supply your material for that particular job. And then also those people that take home a paycheck, and that paycheck is then used to what we call have induced effects, which means that they then spend that paycheck on consumer goods. And so with the model, we're able to then estimate the indirect effects, the induced effects, and those induced and indirect effects also include the supply chain that takes place with these manufacturers. And you can see with the results that I'll talk about in just a few minutes how pervasive these supply chains are throughout the national economy. So the net impact analysis produces two forecasts, and this is how we come up with the net impact. We have two forecasts, one with MEP activities and one without. So the idea then is that we have a counterfactual here, a counterfactual in the sense that what would the world be like without MEP activities taking place compared to the effect that they have on the economy. So the difference between those two then make up the net impact of MEP. And the net impact can be generated with respect to jobs, GDP, personal income, and what's important too for policymaking is how much does it return to the U.S. Treasury in terms of additional taxes. And so those are the four things that we looked at primarily in our study. And so as mentioned, the REMI model uses current data on wages and personal income and GDP to estimate the indirect and induced effects of MEP activities and these four outcomes. And it also considers displacement effects. And that's very important because, you know, we want to make sure that this is a realistic estimate as well as it's best to have it more conservative than more optimistic. And so we certainly feel that this is a conservative estimate because it does take into account the displacement effects, which means that in a competitive world, that if one company does well, that means that another one might not be doing as well because of that success of the company. And so we take into effect what happens to those other companies that maybe in a tight labor market have to you know, sort of yield some of their employees to this more successful company and you know, have to maybe pay higher wages, become less competitive because they aren't as productive as the MEP partners are. And so this displacement effect is very important. And the REMI model does a very good job in our estimation of taking those types of effects into account. In addition, it's conservative because we only look at the personal income taxes that are generated. We aren't looking at revenue sources from things like corporate income tax because you know, mostly this is generated by the jobs and the sales. And so this is you know, a personal income tax oriented approach. Certainly there's corporate income tax revenue that's generated from this. There's property tax, there's sales taxes, but we're focusing on just the personal income tax. So again, this is a conservative estimate that we're offering here in this particular study. So let me continue on. The next slide shows the results. And the results are that the net impact of MEP, according to our estimates, has 142,000 additional jobs retained or created due to the direct effect of the 80-some thousand jobs that we talked about from the survey. It has $15.4 billion in additional retained GDP, $8.4 billion in personal income, $1.13 billion to the U.S. Treasury in those additional personal income taxes that I just mentioned. Overall, then, we have an 8.7 to 1 rate of return or return on investment of that $130 million that the federal government spends on the MEP network. And so with an 8.7 to 1 return on investment, that's you know, a pretty good return for programs like this. And the effects are widely dispersed across the country. It's dispersed geographically as well as across the various sectors. About 90% of the respondents are manufacturers to this survey, and mostly in fabricated metals and machinery manufacturing. But 80% of the generated effects are in other industries. Many are in manufacturing, but some of the more prevalent industries outside of manufacturing include construction, retail trade, and healthcare. And also, what we find is that about 50% of MEP's impact on employment is spread among occupations that are also outside of manufacturing. And these occupations include sales and administrative support. They include, let's see, what else? Well, I guess the single largest one is sales and administrative support, and in our study, there's many others there that you can look at as well. But the overall implication of all this is that the MEP, while it focuses on manufacturing, really has a much broader effect on our economy. It helps manufacturers, it helps those manufacturers that are supplying goods to the MEP clients, but at the same time, it also helps the construction industry, the retail industry, the healthcare industry as well. One final note, and that is that since we took the surveys at face value, we decided that we would try to estimate what would it take in terms of the percentage of these surveys that are actually true to break even in terms of the revenue that the federal government received with respect to the increase in personal income tax. And what we found that only 11% of that of what was estimated or what was offered in the surveys had to be true in order for the government to break even in terms of MEP's activities. And so I think that shows that MEP has a significant effect on the economy. The estimates that we feel most confident in says that, again, the rate on investment is about 8.7 to 1. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Randy, so much for that. I myself am not an economist, and I'm thankful that we have them, but I boiled that down to just what he summarized, is that essentially the return to the federal treasury is 8.7 to 1 on this program, which is incredible. And we've shared that with many members of Congress, and they said that's just crazy. That's incredible. So I think, to me, the study just verified what we already knew, that this program is incredibly impactful. And we're thankful for all of the work that the WGE Upjohn report gave us, so we can actually have some data to back that up. So thank you for that.